I was 23 years old when my uncle Desmond stood up in front of the entire Hargrove County Civil Development Council. 12 people who controlled every grant, every contract, every opportunity in our region, and called me a liar. Not quietly. Not privately. He pointed at me across that table and told them I had falsified my project proposal. That I was incompetent. That hiring me would be an embarrassment to the council's legacy. The room went silent. I sat there, hands flat on the table, feeling every eye on me. Some pitying. Some satisfied. A few already nodding along, because Desmond had been on that council for 11 years. He was the council as far as most of them knew. What he didn't realize, what nobody in that room realized, was that I had spent the previous 6 weeks quietly pulling on a thread. And I had brought the entire sweater with me. It was sitting in a manila folder, right there on the table in front of me. Let me back up. My name is Sloan Merritt. I grew up in Hargrove County, the kind of place where everybody knows everybody and everybody definitely knows the Merritt family, because of Desmond. Uncle Desmond Merritt was the family crown jewel. 11 years on the Civil Development Council. His photo hung in the lobby of the county administration building. He gave the keynote at the annual civic luncheon every single spring. My grandmother kept a framed newspaper clipping of him on her mantel like it was a portrait of a saint. Me. I was just Desmond's niece. The quiet one. The one who studied urban planning at Crestfield State on a partial scholarship, worked 2 part-time jobs to cover the rest, and came back home because I genuinely believed I could help rebuild the district's crumbling infrastructure grant program. Desmond had told me himself, "Come back, Sloan, there's real work to be done here." So I came back. What I didn't know then was that Desmond had built something in my absence. Not community programs. Not civic improvements. A system. Carefully constructed, quietly protected. And I had just walked straight into the middle of it. The first sign something was wrong came 3 weeks after I submitted my proposal. I had applied for a junior program coordinator position under the council's new neighborhood revitalization initiative. I had spent 40 hours on that proposal. Cited data. Included case studies from 3 comparable counties that had successfully rebuilt their grant pipelines. My former professor at Crestfield, Dr. Anita Forsyth, had reviewed it personally and told me it was one of the strongest entry-level submissions she had seen in years. I was qualified. My paperwork was clean. My references were solid. But I kept getting delayed. First it was a scheduling conflict. Then a committee restructuring. Then I was told the review period had been extended. Every time I followed up with the council's administrative coordinator, a soft-spoken woman named Bev, she would apologize and tell me the decision was still pending. 6 weeks in, I called Desmond directly. He answered on the second ring, warm as ever. "Sloan, sweetheart. I was just thinking about you." I told him I was concerned about the delays. That I hadn't heard anything concrete. That other candidates had apparently already been contacted for second interviews. There was a pause. "These things take time, Sloan. The council doesn't move fast. You know that." I told him I understood, but that I had heard through a colleague that the position might already have been informally offered to someone else. Another pause. Longer this time. "Where did you hear that?" I didn't give him a name. I just said it was a concern I wanted to address directly. His voice shifted. Still calm. But the warmth dialed down exactly 1 degree. "Sloan, I have to be honest with you. Some of the council members have raised concerns about your proposal. Certain sections read as, and I'm just relaying what was said, a little thin on practical experience. You're fresh out of school. That's not an insult, it's just reality." I reminded him that I had 2 years of internship experience documented in the submission. Internships aren't field experience, sweetheart. This is a real program with real funding. I sat with that for a second. Then I asked him directly, "Desmond, are you advocating for my application or not?" The pause that followed was the longest one yet. "I'm on a council of 12 people, Sloan. I can't just hand you something because you're family. That would actually hurt you more than help you. People would talk. Sis. I thanked him and got off the phone. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after that call. Something didn't sit right. Not the rejection, I could handle rejection. What I couldn't shake was the specific way he had said certain sections read as thin. Because those sections were the strongest parts of my proposal. Any urban planning professional would have recognized that immediately. Which meant either Desmond hadn't read it carefully, or someone had told him what to think about it before he ever opened it. I started making calls. The first person I reached out to was a woman named Portia Sands. Portia had applied for a different council position 2 years prior, a senior grants analyst role, and had withdrawn her application under circumstances nobody in the county ever fully explained. We had connected briefly at a Crestfield alumni event, and something about the way she had talked about the council that night had stayed with me. Guarded. Careful. Like someone choosing every word deliberately. When I told her what had happened with my application, there was a silence on the line that told me everything before she said a single word. Sloan, she said finally. How much do you actually know about how the council allocates its discretionary funding? I told her I knew the public-facing structure. The grant categories. The application process. That's the part they want you to know, she said. She didn't give me specifics that day. But she told me to submit a public records request for the council's vendor contracts going back 5 years. She told me to be specific. To request the full documentation, not the summary reports that got posted to the county website. I filed the request the next morning. While I waited, I went back through everything I could find publicly. Meeting minutes. Budget summaries. Approved grant recipients. I started building a spreadsheet, tracking every vendor contract that had been approved under Desmond's tenure on the council. At first glance, everything looked procedurally correct. Vendors were listed. Amounts were recorded. Projects were named. But when I started cross-referencing the vendor names against the county's business registration database, something strange appeared. 3 of the vendors, listed across multiple contracts totaling nearly $400,000 in approved payments, had registration addresses that didn't match any commercial or office location in Hargrove County. One was listed at what turned out to be a vacant lot on the east side of town. Another shared an address with a residential property. I stared at my screen for a long time. Then I picked up the phone and called Portia back. You found something, she said. She didn't even wait for me to speak. I told her what I had found. The addresses. The amounts. The pattern. There's more, she said. But you're going to need someone who knows how to read the full financial trail. Not just the contracts, the payment disbursements. She gave me a name. A forensic accountant named Ward Tillman who had done independent work for 2 other county oversight cases in the past decade. Semi-retired. Quiet. But very, very good. I called Ward Tillman that same afternoon. He agreed to take a preliminary look. 7 days later he called me back. His voice was calm in the way that people are calm when they are sitting with something very serious and choosing their words carefully. Sloan, he said. What you have here is the beginning of something significant. I'm going to need more documentation. But what I can tell you right now is that the pattern in these vendor payments is not accidental. I asked him what he meant. I mean, he said, that someone has been using this council's discretionary fund as a personal withdrawal account. Systematically. For years. I sat back in my chair. And then I thought about Desmond's photo on my grandmother's mantel. The framed newspaper clipping. The keynote speech every spring. And the way his voice had gone cold, just 1 degree, when I'd asked him if he was advocating for me. I wasn't just dealing with nepotism. I was standing at the edge of something much larger. And I had 6 days before the full council meeting where Desmond was scheduled to formally recommend the final candidate for the Neighborhood Revitalization Initiative position. 6 days to build a case that couldn't be dismissed, ignored, or buried. I closed my laptop, picked up my pen and got to work. Ward Tillman worked out of a small office above a print shop on Caldwell Street, the kind of place that had mismatched chairs and filing cabinets older than I was. When I walked in carrying a box of printed records and a flash drive, he didn't look surprised. He looked like a man who had been expecting exactly this kind of visit for a long time. He was in his late 60s, broad-shouldered, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and a yellow legal pad already open on his desk. He had spent 22 years as a senior auditor for the state comptroller's office before going independent. Portia had told me he was the kind of man who could look at a column of numbers and feel when something was wrong before he could even prove it. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Walk me through what you have," he said. I laid everything out. The vendor contracts. The registration addresses. The payment disbursement records I had received through my public records request. The spreadsheet I had built cross-referencing approval dates against council meeting minutes. Ward didn't interrupt. He just read. Slowly. Methodically. Occasionally making a small mark on his legal pad. After 40 minutes he set down his pen and looked at me over his glasses. "How close are you to the council member you suspect?" I told him Desmond was my uncle. He nodded slowly, like that confirmed something he had already suspected. "That explains the vendor selection pattern," he said. "These contracts weren't awarded through competitive bidding. They were sole-sourced, meaning one council member with enough institutional authority could approve them with minimal committee pushback." I asked him how much money we were looking at. He tapped the spreadsheet with one finger. "Conservatively, based on what you've brought me today, just the contracts I can directly trace to shell registrations, we're looking at somewhere between $350,000 and $420,000. But Sloan," he said, leaning forward, "this is only what's in the discretionary fund records you were able to access publicly. If there are additional fund categories that weren't captured in your records request, the number could be significantly higher." The room felt very quiet for a moment. "What do I do with this?" I asked. "First," he said, "you let me finish the full audit. I need at least 5 more days with these records. Second, and this is important, you do not confront anyone. You do not hint at what you know. You do not change your behavior around your uncle in any way that might signal you're building a case. Do you understand?" I told him I understood. "Third," he said, "you need a lawyer." The lawyer Portia recommended was a woman named Cecily Drummond. She practiced civil and administrative law out of an office on the 3rd floor of a building downtown, and she had spent 6 years before private practice working in the state attorney general's public integrity unit. When I called her and explained the situation in broad terms, she asked me 3 questions, listened to my answers, and then said, "Come in tomorrow at 9. Cecily was 41, precise, and completely unimpressed by institutional authority. The first thing she told me when I sat down in her office was that what I was describing, if the financial evidence held up, constituted a serious breach of public trust and potentially multiple counts of fraud against a government body. "The challenge," she said, spreading her hands flat on her desk, "is that you're not just dealing with a financial crime. You're dealing with a man who has 11 years of social capital in this county. Relationships with every council member. Relationships with the county administrator's office. Relationships with local media. If you bring this forward without airtight documentation, he will not be the one who gets buried. You will." I told her I was aware of that. "Good," she said. Asterisk. "Then here is what we are going to do." She walked me through a strategy that was methodical and precise. Ward would complete his forensic audit and produce a formal written report with citations to every source document. Cecily would prepare a formal disclosure package, a structured presentation of the evidence designed specifically for submission to the county's Ethics Oversight Board as well as the State Comptroller's Office. We would not go to local media first. We would not confront Desmond privately. We would not tip our hand in any direction until the documentation was complete and filed. "The moment this becomes a conversation," Cecily said, He has the opportunity to get ahead of it. We don't give him that opportunity. I nodded. There is one more thing, she said, and her tone shifted slightly. The council meeting. You said he's scheduled to formally recommend a candidate for the neighborhood revitalization position in 6 days. I told her yes. Are you planning to attend? I said I hadn't decided. She looked at me steadily. Attend, she said. Say nothing. Bring nothing. Just be present in that room. Whatever happens, I want you there as a witness. Because if he uses that meeting to publicly discredit you, which based on what you've described is entirely possible, that becomes part of the record. And part of our case. Over the next 4 days, Ward Tillman worked through the full documentation. On the second day he called me with an update that changed the shape of everything. Sloan, I found a second layer. He explained it carefully. Beyond the shell vendor contracts, he had identified a pattern in the council's community outreach fund. A separate budget line used to pay for public engagement events, community workshops, printed materials and related programming. Over a 4-year period, payments had been issued to a sole proprietorship called Hargrove Community Connections LLC for a cumulative total of $89,000. Hargrove Community Connections LLC had no web presence, no listed employees, no verifiable event history in the county. Its registered agent was a man named Clifton Price. Ward had cross-referenced Clifton Price against county property records, business filings and public records. Clifton Price was Desmond's brother-in-law. I sat down on my kitchen floor when Ward told me that. Not because I was surprised exactly, but because of the scale of it. This wasn't a single opportunistic decision. This was a structured, long-running arrangement. Desmond had spent years building infrastructure, literal financial infrastructure, designed to funnel public money to people connected to him while his photograph hung in the lobby of the county administration building. And the whole time the council had trusted him completely. Ward's formal report was ready on day 4. 41 pages. Every vendor contract. Every payment disbursement. Every registration discrepancy. A clear narrative timeline showing when each irregularity had begun, how it had escalated, and how it had been structured to avoid triggering standard internal review thresholds. The total figure across both the discretionary fund and the community outreach fund came to $512,000. I read that number 3 times. Then I called Cecily. She was quiet for a moment after I gave her Ward's summary figures. Okay, she said. We're ready. I'm filing the disclosure package with the Ethics Board and the State Comptroller tomorrow morning. Both simultaneously. Once that's filed, it becomes an official record. He cannot make it disappear. I asked her about the council meeting. It was 2 days away. The filing will not be public yet by the time of that meeting, she said. Ethics Board intake typically takes 3 to 5 business days before it's formally docketed. So when you walk into that room he won't know. Nobody will know. What if he attacks me publicly at the meeting? I asked. What if he tries to use it as an opportunity to formally discredit me in front of the full council? There was a brief pause. Then you let him, Cecily said. Let him put every word on the record. Let him be as specific as he wants to be. Because the more he says in that room, the more clearly it will read, in hindsight, as a deliberate attempt to neutralize a witness. I thought about that. And the manila folder? I asked. Cecily had suggested it herself 2 days earlier. A physical copy of Ward's executive summary, not the full 41-page report, just the 8-page summary that laid out the core findings in plain language. Printed. Organized. Sitting in front of me on that table. Bring it, she said. Don't open it unless he forces your hand. But bring it. The night before the council meeting, I sat at my kitchen table and thought about my grandmother's mantle. The framed newspaper clipping of Desmond. The pride in her voice every time someone mentioned his name at a family gathering. The way my mother had always said, half joking, half not, you should be more like your uncle Sloan. He built something real. I thought about what it meant to build something real. Desmond had built something real technically. He had built an 11-year reputation. A network of relationships. A position of trust so thoroughly established that nobody had thought to look underneath it. But underneath it was $512,000 of public money. Money that was supposed to fund neighborhood revitalization. Infrastructure repairs. Community programming for people in a district that genuinely needed it. That money had not gone to Hargrove County. It had gone to shell vendors and a brother-in-law's LLC. And the communities that should have benefited from those programs had simply gone without year after year, while Desmond gave his keynote speech every spring and smiled for the camera. I thought about all of that. And then I printed the 8-page executive summary, slid it into a manila folder, and set it on the table by the door so I wouldn't forget it in the morning. I went to bed at 11. I didn't sleep until 2. The Hargrove County Civil Development Council met in a room on the second floor of the county administration building that smelled like old carpet and recycled air. 12 chairs arranged around a long rectangular table. A projector screen at the far end that nobody ever used. Framed certificates on the walls. A small public gallery section along the back wall with 3 rows of plastic chairs for observers. I arrived 15 minutes early. I signed in at the front desk, took a seat in the public gallery and set my bag on the floor beside me with the manila folder inside it. I was wearing a navy blazer over a white blouse. I had slept 3 hours. I had eaten half a piece of toast for breakfast because my stomach wouldn't cooperate with anything more substantial. I watched the council members file in one by one. Some of them I recognized from public events. A few nodded at me politely without knowing who I was. One woman, a heavy-set council member named Glenda Marsh who chaired the grants subcommittee, looked at me for a half-second longer than the others, then looked away. Desmond arrived last. He walked in the way he always walked into rooms. Unhurried, shoulders back, greeting people by name, touching elbows, laughing at something a colleague said before he'd even fully sat down. He was wearing a charcoal gray suit and a burgundy tie. He looked like a man who had not spent a single uncomfortable minute in that building in 11 years. He didn't see me immediately. When he did, when his scan of the room finally landed on my face in the 3rd row of the public gallery, something moved behind his eyes. Fast. Gone almost immediately, replaced by a smooth, practiced smile. He gave me a small nod. I nodded back. The meeting was called to order at 9 o'clock by the council chair, a lean, silver-haired man named Douglas Farwell who had been running these meetings for 7 years with the quiet efficiency of someone who genuinely enjoyed procedural order. He moved through the opening agenda items briskly. Budget updates. A zoning variance review. A community feedback summary from the prior quarter. 40 minutes in, Douglas Farwell looked down at his agenda sheet. Next item. Neighborhood Revitalization Initiative. Coordinator position hiring recommendation. Desmond, this is yours. Desmond straightened slightly in his chair. He picked up a single sheet of paper from the stack in front of him, glanced at it briefly, and then set it back down in the manner of a man who didn't actually need the notes. Thank you, Douglas. As the council knows, we've been in a review period for the junior coordinator position under the NRI for approximately 8 weeks. The hiring subcommittee has evaluated all submitted proposals and conducted preliminary interviews with the top candidates. He paused. Before I present the subcommittee's recommendation, I want to address something directly. It has come to my attention that one of the applicants, a member of my own family in the interest of full transparency, has raised informal concerns about the fairness of our review process. The room shifted almost imperceptibly. A few council members glanced at each other. Douglas Farwell's expression remained neutral, but his eyes moved to the public gallery. To me. I want to be clear, Desmond continued, his voice measured and authoritative, that the subcommittee's process has been conducted with complete integrity. Every proposal was reviewed on its merits. The concerns that have been raised informally are not supported by the process record. And frankly, here he paused just long enough to let the next words land with weight. The proposal in question, while showing some academic promise, contains significant gaps in practical methodology that made it unsuitable for a program of this scope and budget. He let that sit for a moment. I raise this not to embarrass anyone, but because transparency demands that if a family relationship is involved, the council deserves to hear directly from me that it did not, and would not, influence this committee's professional judgment. Several council members were nodding. Glenda Marsh was writing something on her notepad. Douglas Farwell cleared his throat. Asterisk, thank you for that disclosure, Desmond. Is there anyone from the public gallery who wishes to speak to this agenda item before we receive the formal recommendation? He was looking at me when he said it. The room was looking at me. I stood up. My heart was moving fast, but my voice, when it came, was steady. I had not planned every word I was going to say, but I had planned the shape of it. Cecily had told me, asterisk, be factual, be calm, be brief, and let the document do the rest. My name is Sloan Merritt, asterisk, I said. Asterisk, I am one of the applicants for the NRI coordinator position. I'm also Desmond Merritt's niece, which he has already acknowledged. I'm not here today to contest the hiring decision. A small ripple of surprise went through the room. That wasn't what they were expecting. I'm here because over the past 6 weeks, in the process of researching my application and following up on procedural delays, I came across financial documentation related to this council's discretionary fund and community outreach fund that I believe this council deserves to be aware of. Complete silence. Desmond's expression had not changed, but his right hand, which had been resting loosely on the table, was now flat and still. I want to be clear that I am not making accusations in this room today. The appropriate disclosures have already been made. Yesterday morning, a formal evidence package prepared by a certified forensic accountant was filed simultaneously with the County Ethics Oversight Board and the State Comptroller's Office. That filing is now an official record. I heard someone exhale sharply at the table. I didn't look to see who. What I have in front of me, I said, reaching into my bag and placing the manila folder on the edge of the gallery railing, is an 8-page executive summary of that forensic audit. I'm not going to read it aloud, but I am going to submit it to the council chair as a formal public comment attachment to today's meeting record, which means it becomes part of the official minutes. I looked directly at Douglas Farwell. Mr. Farwell, I'd like to submit this document for the record. Douglas Farwell looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked at Desmond. Then he looked back at me. That is within your right as a public commenter, he said carefully. The clerk will accept the document. The clerk, a young woman at a small desk near the door, stood up almost reflexively and walked over to receive the folder from my hands. The room had gone very, very quiet. I sat back down. For approximately 4 seconds nobody spoke. Then Desmond said in a voice that was still controlled but had lost something essential from its earlier warmth. Douglas, I think it's important to note that unsubstantiated documents submitted by a disgruntled applicant who happens to be a family member with a clear personal grievance should not be. The document has been submitted for the record, Douglas Farwell said, quietly but with a finality that stopped Desmond mid-sentence. We will follow established procedure from this point. Desmond sat back. He looked at me then. Not the polished, practiced look he had given me when he walked in. Something different. The look of a man recalculating very quickly. I held his gaze and said nothing. Glenda Marsh, who had been writing on her notepad this entire time, set down her pen and spoke for the first time. Douglas, she said, asterisk, I think we need to table the hiring recommendation pending a review of the submitted document. I'd also like to request that the full audit report, not just the summary, be made available to the full council as soon as possible. Seconded, said a council member at the far end of the table without hesitation. Douglas Farwell nodded. The hiring recommendation is tabled. We'll move to the next agenda item. He did not look at Desmond when he said it. Desmond did not speak again for the remainder of the meeting. I sat in my chair in the third row of the public gallery and kept my hands folded in my lap and my expression completely neutral, the way Cecily had told me to. Whatever happens, don't give them a reaction to look at. Be the calmest person in the room. But inside, underneath the navy blazer and the controlled breathing and the 3 hours of sleep and the half piece of toast, something was unwinding. Some coiled 6-week tension that had been sitting behind my sternum since the moment Ward Tillman had said the pattern in these vendor payments is not accidental. It was unwinding because the document was in the record now. It existed in an official capacity in that building. In that room. In the minutes that would be filed and archived and reviewed. Desmond could not make it not exist. The meeting ended 40 minutes later. People began gathering their things. A few council members spoke quietly to each other in clusters near the door, voices low, eyes occasionally drifting toward Desmond, who was still seated, talking to nobody, staring at the middle distance with the expression of a man who had just watched a wall he'd built over 11 years develop a crack he couldn't repair with a single afternoon's work. As I stood and picked up my bag, Glenda Marsh crossed the room toward me. She stopped a few feet away and looked at me for a moment. "Miss Merritt," she said. "How thorough is the full report?" 41 pages, I said. Every source document is cited. The forensic accountant's credentials and methodology are included in the appendix. She held my gaze. "I'll be requesting it by end of day," she said. Then she turned and walked out. I was almost to the door when I heard Desmond's voice behind me. "Sloan." I stopped. I turned around. He was standing now, hands at his sides. The charcoal suit. The burgundy tie. The photo on the mantel version of himself, except that something in the posture had changed. Something load-bearing had shifted. He looked at me for a long moment. He didn't say anything else. And I realized he had called my name because he had expected, out of habit, out of 11 years of being the person everyone deferred to in that building, that calling my name would produce something. An apology. Softening. Some version of Uncle Desmond. I didn't mean for it to go this far. He had miscalculated. "Have a good day, Desmond," I said. And I walked out. The sunlight outside the administration building was sharp and clean after the recycled air of that second-floor meeting room. I stood on the front steps for a moment, bag over my shoulder, and took a long breath. My phone buzzed. A text from Cecily. Ethics Board confirmed receipt of filing this morning. Comptroller's office acknowledged within the hour. How did the meeting go? I typed back. Document is in the official record. Hiring recommendation tabled. Full audit requested by subcommittee chair. 3 seconds later. That's exactly what we needed. Now we wait. I put my phone in my pocket and walked to my car. The wait lasted 11 days. Cecily had told me to expect it. Ethics Board investigations don't move at the speed of a council meeting. They move at the speed of institutional process. Careful, deliberate, and insulated from the kind of social pressure that Desmond had spent 11 years cultivating. That was the point. That was why she had filed there first, before anything went public, before any local reporter got a tip, before the story had a shape that anyone outside that second-floor meeting room could recognize. The document was in the system. The system would do what it was built to do. I went back to my apartment and I waited. The first 3 days were the hardest. I didn't hear from Desmond directly, but I heard from my mother. She called on the second evening, and I knew from the first syllable that Desmond had gotten to her first. "Sloan, what did you do?" I told her calmly what I had done. Not all of it, not the forensic detail, not the specific figures, but the shape of it. I told her I had found financial irregularities in the council's records. That I had hired a certified forensic accountant to review them. That I had filed a formal disclosure with the appropriate oversight bodies before doing anything else. "Do you understand what this is going to do to this family?" she said. I told her I understood what Desmond had already done to this community. She was quiet for a moment. He says you're doing this because you didn't get the job. Mom, I said, the filing was submitted the day before the council meeting. Before the hiring recommendation was even formally presented. The timeline is documented. Another silence. He's your uncle, Sloane. I know, I said. I know exactly who he is. She hung up without saying goodbye. I sat with the phone in my hand for a while after that. Not because I doubted what I had done, but because I understood that the fallout of something like this doesn't only land on the person who deserved it. It lands on everyone connected to them. My grandmother. My mother. The cousins who had grown up proud of the Merritt name in Hargrove County. Desmond had made those choices. But the weight of them was going to be distributed in ways that weren't fair. That was the part nobody tells you about when you decide to do the right thing. On the fourth day, Portia Sands called me. Have you seen the county board's public calendar? She asked. I hadn't. They've posted an emergency closed session for next Tuesday. No agenda item listed publicly, which means it's a personnel or legal matter. So, that's him. That's about him. I called Cecily immediately. She already knew. The ethics board moved faster than I expected, she said. The comptroller's office apparently flagged the filing as a priority review based on the dollar amounts involved and the nature of the shell vendor structure. They've been in contact with the county administrator's office. The closed session is almost certainly a preliminary discussion about suspension of council duties pending the full investigation. Suspension, I said. It's standard procedure when a sitting council member is under active ethics investigation. He would retain his title nominally but be removed from voting participation and committee authority while the investigation is ongoing. I thought about the keynote speech every spring. The photo in the lobby. How long does the full investigation take? I asked. Given the documentation Ward produced, the specificity of it, the sourcing, I'd estimate 6 to 9 months for a complete formal finding. Possibly faster if the comptroller's office escalates it to a criminal referral, which given the amounts involved is a realistic possibility. Criminal, I said. $512,000 in public funds, Sloane. Directed systematically to entities with documented connections to him. That's not a bookkeeping error. The closed session happened on Tuesday as scheduled. I wasn't in the room for it. I wasn't supposed to be. But Cecily had a contact in the county administrator's office who confirmed afterward that the session had lasted 3.5 hours and that Desmond had been present with his own attorney for the final 90 minutes of it. By Wednesday morning, the county administrator had issued a brief public statement. It was careful and procedurally worded in the way that official statements always are, acknowledging that a council member had been placed on administrative leave pending an ongoing ethics review, without naming him directly. But Hargrove County was not a large place. By Wednesday afternoon everyone knew. My phone started buzzing with messages from people I hadn't spoken to in months. Former colleagues from Crestfield. People from the county's civic community who had worked alongside the council for years. A few of them were supportive. A few were cautious. 1 or 2 were openly hostile. People who had built professional relationships with Desmond over the years and weren't ready yet to reckon with what that meant. One message stood out from all of them. It came from a woman named Harriet Odom, who had served as a community liaison for the council's outreach programming for 4 years before quietly stepping down 18 months ago. Her message was 3 sentences long. Sloane. I knew something was wrong for a long time. I didn't have what you had. Thank you. I read that message 4 times. 2 weeks after the council meeting, Ward Tillman called me with a final update on his end. The state comptroller's office had formally requested his full working file. Not just the executive summary but every source document, every annotation, every calculation. They had also reached out to him directly to schedule a formal interview as part of their independent review. "This is moving into serious territory," Ward said. "When the comptroller's office requests the working file directly, it means they're building their own evidentiary record. That's typically a precursor to a criminal referral to the state attorney general." I asked him how he felt about all of it. He was quiet for a moment. "I've done this work for a long time," he said. "I've seen a lot of people in positions of public trust who abused that trust in ways that never saw the light of day. Because nobody looked. Or because the people who noticed didn't have the tools or the courage to do anything about it." He paused. "You looked. And you did something about it. That matters more than people realize." 6 weeks after the council meeting, the Hargrove County Courier, the county's main local paper, ran a front-page story. The headline read, "Longtime council member under state investigation for alleged misappropriation of public funds." The story was thorough. It cited the ethics board filing, the comptroller's review, the shell vendor registrations, the community outreach fund irregularities, and the total figure of $512,000. It quoted a spokesperson for the comptroller's office confirming that the review was active and ongoing. It quoted Douglas Farwell, the council chair, saying the council was cooperating fully with all oversight processes and remained committed to the integrity of its public mission. It did not quote Desmond. His attorney had issued a brief statement describing the allegations as without merit and promising full cooperation with any review process, which is what attorneys always say and which everyone in Hargrove County read for exactly what it was. The story did quote near the bottom, an unnamed source described as a county community advocate who said, "This is about more than one person. This is about what happens when institutions stop asking hard questions about the people they trust." I didn't know who that source was. But I read that sentence 3 times. The family fallout was slower and more complicated than the institutional fallout. My grandmother called me 3 weeks after the story ran. I had been dreading that call more than almost anything else in this entire process. She was 78 years old. She had raised Desmond. She had put his photograph on her mantle. I answered on the first ring. She didn't say hello. She said, "Tell me what he did." So I told her. Carefully. Without cruelty but without softening the facts. I told her about the shell vendors. The brother-in-law's LC. The $512,000. The communities in the district that had been promised programs that never materialized because the funding had been redirected. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a long silence. "He asked me to call you," she said finally. "He wanted me to ask you to speak to the lawyers and say that some of the documentation had been misinterpreted." I waited. "I told him no," she said. Something loosened in my chest that I hadn't realized had been tight. "He's still my son," she said. "But what you're describing, taking money that was supposed to help people who needed it, that's not something I can ask you to cover up. And I won't." We stayed on the phone for another hour after that. We didn't talk about Desmond for most of it. We talked about other things. Family things. Small things. The kind of conversation we hadn't had in a long time. When we hung up, I sat very still for a while. 3 months after the council meeting, the state attorney general's office formally announced a criminal investigation into Desmond Merritt for alleged misappropriation of public funds, fraud against a government body and related charges. The announcement was brief, procedural, and absolute. Desmond resigned from the Civil Development Council the same afternoon the announcement was made. His attorney issued another statement. The county administrator issued another statement. Douglas Farwell issued a statement on behalf of the full council expressing support for the investigative process and outlining new oversight procedures the council would be implementing going forward. The photograph in the lobby of the county administration building came down within the week. I heard about it secondhand. I didn't go to look. My mother called me the evening of the resignation announcement. The call was short. Her voice was tired in a way that I recognized. Not angry anymore, just exhausted by the weight of something she hadn't been able to control. I don't know how to feel about all of this, she said. I know, I said. You don't have to know right now. Are you okay? She asked. It was the first time she had asked me that through this entire process. Yes, I said. I'm okay. And I meant it. 4 months after the council meeting, the Neighborhood Revitalization Initiative coordinator position was reopened. I'm telling you all of this because I know that somewhere in this audience, there is someone sitting with a folder of their own. Maybe it's not a forensic audit. Maybe it's an email chain that doesn't add up. A financial discrepancy that everyone around you seems determined not to notice. A pattern of behavior in someone powerful that you've been told, directly or indirectly, is not your business, not your place, not your fight. Maybe it's something smaller than what I dealt with. Maybe it's something larger. But you've been carrying it around and turning it over and talking yourself out of it because the person on the other side of it has 11 years of social capital and a photograph on a wall somewhere, and you have doubt and a kitchen table and the very reasonable fear of being wrong. Here's what I want to say to you. Get the documentation first. Before you say a single word to anyone who doesn't need to know, get the documentation. Public records requests are free. Forensic accountants exist. Lawyers who specialize in exactly these situations exist. The tools are available. You don't have to walk into a room and make accusations based on instinct. You build the case first and then you let the case speak. Find your Portia Sands. There is almost always someone who noticed before you did and didn't have what you have. Find that person. Not to recruit them into a confrontation, but because they will tell you things that reframe everything you thought you understood about the situation. They will validate what your instincts already knew. And sometimes they will hand you the exact thread you need to pull. Trust the process over the performance. Desmond was a performance. The keynote speeches. The framed clippings. The warm handshakes and the first-name greetings and the 11 years of being the most trusted person in the room. None of that was the process. The process was the ethics board, the comptroller's office, the forensic audit, the official record. The performance could not survive contact with the process, and it never can. Institutional authority built on genuine accountability is stronger than institutional authority built on social capital every single time. You just have to be willing to engage the right system. And finally, be prepared for the fallout to be uneven. This is the part that I think people don't talk about enough. When you expose something like this, the consequences don't land only on the person who deserves them. They land on your mother who doesn't know how to feel. On your grandmother who has a framed clipping on her mantle. On colleagues and community members who built professional relationships in good faith with someone who turned out to be using their trust as cover. The fallout is wide and it is not always fair and it does not resolve cleanly. That doesn't mean you were wrong to act. It means that doing the right thing is sometimes more expensive than you budgeted for. And you have to decide in advance, before the folder is opened, before the filing is submitted, before you walk into that meeting room, whether the cost is one you're willing to pay. For me it was. Because the alternative was walking away and leaving $512,000 of unaccountable public money in a system that had already proven it would protect itself. The alternative was letting Harriet Odom's quiet guardedness at a civic event be the last word on the subject. The alternative was letting the communities in this district keep waiting for programs that were never coming. No is a complete sentence, and so is enough. I've been in my new role as NRI coordinator for 3 months now. It is not glamorous work. It is grant applications and community meetings and budget reconciliations and phone calls with contractors and a lot of spreadsheets that, after the last 6 months of my life, I am very comfortable reading carefully. Last week I attended a neighborhood planning session in the east side of the district. The same east side where one of Desmond's shell vendor contracts had listed a vacant lot as its registered business address. There were 43 residents in that room. They talked about what they needed. Infrastructure repairs, youth programming, a community health outreach initiative that had been proposed twice in the last 4 years and never funded. I sat at that table and I listened and I took notes and I thought about Ward Tillman saying the pattern in these vendor payments is not accidental. The money that was supposed to reach these people had been diverted for years. They had kept showing up to planning sessions and submitting feedback and trusting that the process was working, without knowing that someone at the top of that process had built a quiet, systematic mechanism for making sure it didn't. They deserved better than that. They still do. And now, for the first time in a long time, there is someone in the coordinator's chair who is actually trying to get it to them. That is not a triumphant ending. It's a beginning. A real one with no guarantees and a lot of work still ahead. But I'll take a real beginning over a performed conclusion every single time. So here's my question for you. Not about what happened to me. I've told you that story and you can make of it what you will. My question is this. What have you been carrying around and talking yourself out of? What is the thing that you noticed, maybe 6 months ago, maybe 6 years ago, that didn't add up, that everyone around you seemed determined not to examine, that you filed away in the back of your mind under not my business or I'm probably wrong or asterisk the cost is too high? Because I'm not going to tell you that acting on it will be easy or clean or without consequence. But I will tell you this, and I mean it without qualification. The folder does not get lighter from sitting on the shelf. It just gets heavier. Drop your story in the comments. Tell me what you've been carrying. Tell me what you did about it or what you wish you had done or what you're still trying to figure out how to do. I read every single one. And if nothing else, know that someone out there sat at a kitchen table for 6 weeks with a spreadsheet and a folder and a quiet voice telling her to stop, and she didn't stop, and it mattered. Yours can too.